Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is February 26, 2018, and today we are very excited to have with us Chad Anderson. Chad, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
It's good to have you. And today we're here to talk about Chad's book. He just came out with it. I believe it's self-published. Is that right, Chad?
Correct.
The book is called Gay Mormon Dad. Chad is a licensed clinical social worker who practices here in Salt Lake City. And we felt like this interview would be timely for a number of reasons. A month or two ago, we interviewed Tom Christofferson, which we were very honored and happy to do, to talk about his book. Tom talked about his life and his faith and his brief mixed orientation marriage there, and his thoughts around being gay and Mormon. And so that's brought some of these issues into the forefront. Recently, Mormon Stories listeners will remember an interview I did with Josh and Lolly Weed, who came kind of burst onto the scenes 5 or so years ago, where Josh sort of said, "Hey, I'm gay, but I love Lolly, and I'm sexually attracted to her, and we're in this great mixed orientation marriage." Well, some of you will know that Josh and Lolly very courageously announced a week or two ago that they're getting divorced. Josh is not only coming out as gay, but is decided to live as an authentic gay man, which means dating and having relationships with men. He and Lolly are still strong, but this brings back into the forefront this issue that is going to continually confront LGBT Mormons and their friends and family. What about celibacy? What about mixed orientation marriages? What about staying in the church as a faithful Mormon? And so the reason why I thought it'd be really cool to interview Chad, not only does he have his own story, not only does he have this important book and his own experiences trying to live as a faithful gay Mormon, getting married in a mixed orientation marriage as a faithful Mormon, but also having that not work out. He also is a licensed clinical social worker and can talk a lot with direct experience about the mental health implications of making these sort of choices. And so that is what today's interview is going to be about.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that recap. There's a lot going on in the gay married world lately for Mormons, and I feel like all gay Mormon mixed orientation marriages are all cut from the same cloth. A little bit. They all have a lot to do with each other, but every variation is completely different. Tom Christofferson's story, Josh Weed's story, and my story are all completely separate from each other. And I know thousands of gay Mormon moms and dads and transgender individuals who have their own versions of those stories, but often from the same origin place.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We want to thank everyone who is joining us on Facebook Live. We like to do these interviews live streaming, mainly because we think it's interesting to have the kind of the real-time collaborative kind of feedback questions. So we want to welcome everyone who's joined us today. Right now we've got 41 people joining us. I imagine that's going to grow over a little bit. And so we just want to welcome everyone. Please send us your comments and questions on the Facebook feed. Please share this live interview on your walls if this is a topic that you're interested in or that you want other people to know and care about. I also just want to let everyone know there are different ways you can help make Mormon Stories Podcast successful. You can like our Facebook page at Mormon Stories Podcast. You can give us a positive review. We sometimes get mean-spirited people who don't even listen to the podcast, bringing our average review scores down. So if you can give us a positive review on Facebook, that makes a big difference to us. If you can share our podcast right now, like it, and share it, that'll make a big difference. We also really appreciate those who are joining us through iTunes. If you can give us a positive review on iTunes, that goes a long way towards promoting what we do. And of course, we live and die by our support, financial supporters. So those who are able, go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button $10, $20, $50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, keeps the 501c3 alive and allows us to continue providing this content. So we're ready to dive in. We want to thank again everyone for joining us. And Chad, if you don't mind, tell us just a little bit about what you do as a therapist and how what type of experience you've had with LGBT Mormons that kind of adds an extra level of kind of experience to the story that we're about to go into.
Yeah, I was a social worker and therapist for many years prior to my coming out of the closet in 2011. After I came out and then moved to Utah, I have done almost exclusively LGBT work, and people going through faith crisis or leaving Mormonism have kind of become areas of specialty for me since I've been here in Utah. But I had several years as a therapist and social worker prior to that. Here in Utah, it seems to be a lot of the same stories over and over again for LGBT Mormons, at least. Depression, anxiety, the coming out process and navigating shattered relationships and family lives, the loss of faith, often suicidal thoughts and or attempts, followed by this kind of, for those that survive and make it out, followed by this extremely long period of figuring out who they are now that they're no longer part of the community that they were once a part of. I do have many clients who have come out as gay and have stayed active as Mormons or even stayed in mixed orientation marriages. But the overwhelming majority of the people I've worked with have chosen to leave the faith. And then again, there's that long period of rebuilding your life afterward and navigating relationships. Fathers and grandfathers and every relationship around you, professionally and personally, that then becomes defined by the decision to come out. Ultimately, hopefully resulting in a really happy, authentic life after all of those years of feeling broken. And that mirrors my own story in a lot of ways. On the flip side of that, in mixed orientation marriages, at least, we have the straight spouse, is what they often call them, the person who was married to the gay person. And they have a lot of different depression and anxiety issues to go through as a result. So navigating along any point of that path, therapy can be really helpful along the way.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we're really excited. Again, this is a really well-written book, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. But what we're going to do today is not, we're not going to assume that our listeners have read your book.
Sure.
We're just going to do your story. And there will be some overlap on what's in the book. But, if we cover everything in the book, there's no need to read the book. And I think the book is worth reading.
Sure.
So I'm just going to start talking about your story, and we'll dive right in. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Chad, tell us about your early Mormon experience growing up in the church, and when you first started kind of realizing that you were maybe different.
Yeah, I come from a very, very historically Mormon family. Ancestors, nearly all of them in the 1830s and 40s period were European immigrants who came over and joined the Saints and crossed the plains in hand carts. And a number of my ancestors from that era ended up settling farmland in Idaho, where they raised their children, who raised their children, who raised their children. So my parents are both from southeastern Idaho, and that's where they were married and had the first 5 of their children. And then in the mid-1970s, they moved to southwestern Missouri, which is where my little sister and I were born. So we are the 6th and the 7th kids. Growing up, I had a very isolated Mormon experience in that I was in a community that historically and presently really dislikes Mormons, despite the Mormon origins of the area, with Adam-on-Diamond and Nauvoo and everything else being very close to there. But there were very few Mormon kids in my school. We were part of a ward where people would drive an hour to get to church. So it was a very, I have a very Mormon family, but we were very isolated growing up. That said, I was always the true blue kid. I was the one who read the Book of Mormon by the time he was 6 years old. I'd gone all the way through it already. I was the one who looked forward to church every Sunday and prayed constantly. And I tell a story in my book about being 8 years old and coming home from church, and my hero was Abinadi from the Book of Mormon. And my brother and sisters were fighting, and I tell them, we have to keep the peace in the home. You're inviting the spirit of contention. I mean, so even as a very little kid, I was that Mormon kid. But I probably started realizing I was different as early as 4 or 5. I didn't fit in socially with other boys. I mean, that's too young to have romantic crushes. But kids that age, including my own sons, talk about, I have a crush on this girl at school, we're dating, or that's pretty common for even kindergarten children. And if I had a crush, it was on boys in school. I didn't fit in with the other boys. I didn't do the sports thing. I was more creative. I wanted to play with the girls and draw pictures and stay inside. So it was a pretty early realization that I was different, that I didn't fit in, and that not only that, but I had to learn how to hide it. Because if I didn't hide it, I'd get teased. So starting very young in my development, it was the realization that not only am I different, but I have to pretend to not be different. And that became kind of the story that followed for the next 30 years of hiding in plain sight.
How does a kid, as you're growing up into middle school and high school, what are the elements of your behavior that you notice might signal things you don't want to signal? And what was it like for you trying to mute or change or be aware of whatever those things might have been?
Yeah. Adolescent boys are really cruel to each other. They tease each other constantly. And it's always, when another boy doesn't fit in, it's almost always you throw like a girl, or you're gay, or you're a fag, or you're a sissy. There's that element of that. And when you're realizing that you are a fag or a sissy, that teaches you how to hide that even more abjectly in those social relationships. So pretending to have crushes on girls when you really have crushes on guys. Not only that, but when you do have a crush on a guy, for an 11 or a 12-year-old kid, which is kind of when crushes start and hormones kick in, learning that there's something wrong with you. I would beat myself up constantly. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? To the point where as a young teen, I developed an anxiety condition whenever I noticed an attractive guy walk by, which is normal for anyone to admire someone else and have a crush, but it would develop into nausea or just self-flogging. Dang it, why are you doing this? Feeling like I was unworthy of the priesthood even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. So that became a constant part of my development. So it was very, very much based in depression and anxiety, even at the ages of 9, 10, 11, but particularly into adolescence. I didn't fit in socially, I had different interests, and I had different romantic and sexual feelings than the other kids around me.
Do you remember kind of your first intense crush on a boy?
Yeah. I had a number of crushes probably over the years, but I wouldn't let myself have the crushes. So it would happen, and this is what I go through with my clients a lot. When you grow up gay or trans, you tend to learn how to divide yourself into pieces. And I think Mormons are really good at this anyway. There's the part that you live publicly, and then the parts of yourself that you learn how to hide from other people. And when you're gay, that's magnified by 1,000. So I would have crushes subconsciously or internally, but I would never give them voice, even in my own journal, even in my own thinking. So I had lots of crushes, and probably particularly as a 15, 16-year-old moving into high school era, I had some pretty significant romantic feelings for some of my friends. One guy in particular that I had a huge
Mormon
crush.
Friend?
Yeah, Mormon friend, all through high school. But every time any of those feelings would surface, it's what's wrong with you, what's wrong with you, what's wrong with you. So it became anxiety and depression inducing to even have romantic feelings. So there's that kind of counterbalance. I knew that there was something wrong with me, or I felt at the time that there was.
So was there a moment in your adolescence where you were like, there's something wrong with me, or I'm gay? Or was it like, no, I'm straight, but I've just got these weaknesses? How did you experience that?
I don't talk about this part a lot in my book, but I was sexually abused as a young kid. And I know a lot of people who went through that. And then I kind of assumed that because I had been sexually abused, that was the cause of my same-sex attractions. So as an adolescent, I viewed any homosexual feelings as a result of the sexual abuse I had undergone.
Do you talk about whether it was a male or a female?
It was a male.
It was a male.
It was a male. But being sexually abused is a completely separate thing, a separate healing process than being gay. There's no direct, sexual abuse doesn't cause homosexuality or vice versa.
What if somebody were to say, now wait a minute, you were abused and by a male and now you're gay, like it did cause it?
Right.
What would you say?
There's no correlation. I was abused and I was gay. And those are two completely separate trauma issues. And I had to work through both of those.
Are you saying scientifically, empirically?
Yeah, there's lots of research studies out there on that.
That say what?
That say that there's no direct correlation. It can result, sexual abuse can result in more feelings of shame or mental illness or emotional struggles, but there's no direct correlation between sexual orientation and sexual abuse. But as a teenager, that's how I saw it. So when I sought out assistance from church leaders, frequently I would ask for, help me recover from these things that happened to me as a kid that I had no control over. And I saw myself as broken. But I knew very clearly that I had zero attraction to women socially. I have a lot of female friends, but I had zero sexual attraction to women. And again, I felt like there was something very, very wrong with me. It was probably when I was 15 that I started realizing gay was a thing. And I went to a bishop and kind of admitted out loud for the first time that I am having significant sexual attraction and it's having a lot of problems. And he was very kind and compassionate, and he sent me home with The Miracle of Forgiveness, which is the book that talks all about homosexuality being curable. It's an abomination. If you give into it, then you're evil and wrong, and it goes. And that book ruined me.
Did you read it?
Oh yeah, I read it 100 times. That book ruined me.
What are some of the things that were said that hurt you?
Oh, probably the most painful piece, and I've talked to many other gay Mormons who had this experience, is if you haven't been cured yet, you're not trying hard enough. The fact that it was curable, that it instilled a false hope in me. So I didn't see myself as not only curable of the abuse that I went through, but curable of being gay. And it's not curable. So it created a lot of psychological damage for me because I was a really good teen. I got good grades. I was the kind of guy that moms would hear, oh, you're going to Chad's house. That's fine. You don't need to call or check in. I mean, I was a really trustworthy, good kid.
What's really interesting about the way sometimes the church handles these books. So I remember when I was a missionary, there were only a few books you were allowed to read on your mission. It was like Articles of Faith and by James Talmage. What were some of the Great Apostasy? I don't know. Articles of Faith. Was there another one? I'm already spacing it. Anyway, you could also read A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, and you could read Spencer W. Kimball's Miracle of Forgiveness. So, this is a book that was not only widely read in the church and widely used by bishops, but it was also, pervasively read by young adults and missionaries. Well, now the church has sort of, taken books like, Mormon Doctrine, and it's certainly de-emphasizing, if not sort of trying to minimize the amount of people that would buy or purchase Spencer W. Kimball's book, but they don't ever condemn the things that were said in the book. They don't ever tell people to stop reading it or renounce it.
Right.
And so it's really tricky because these books can be very harmful, but the word never gets out explicitly. And so their impact can still reverberate in 2018, even if the book is either taken out of print or de-emphasized. And I should just say, there are many, many members of the Kimball family that I know that will admit that Spencer W. Kimball regretted much of the harshness in his book. And there are members of the Kimball family I know that are fighting to have the book taken out of print. We even referred to this in my interview with Ed Kimball on Mormon Stories a few years ago. But here we are. And
then the juxtaposition of, we are a church who forgives, we embrace, we want sinners to come to us so we can help them find forgiveness and be right with God. And if you're gay, you're an abomination. You should be struck down. You're not trying hard enough. And so the juxtaposition of, I should be helping other people and forgiving other people. And I have a fairly significant amount of childhood trauma that I talk about in the book, including a very abusive stepfather. And the messages we received over and over were forgive, give them another chance. And yet I'm reading these words in this book that tell me that you're not trying hard enough, you're not good enough, this is an abomination, a crime against nature, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the stories from my adolescence I can almost smile at now. So I remember being 16 and making sure my room was just pristinely like a holy place. Scriptures by my bed. I would listen to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir at night. Huge picture of Jesus. I even tried, not multiple times, but the advice that I think it was Boyd K. Packer gave once, that in order to avoid masturbation or interfering with myself, tying my hand to the headboard at night.
You did that?
I did that a couple of times because I was so constantly tempted. And again, libido for teenagers, that's a normal thing, but I felt like I was wrong, like I was broken. But I tell one particular story. Sometimes the temptations would get too strong, and I would get up and take the picture of Jesus off the wall and turn it around and turn the music off. And then after masturbation would just feel horribly shameful to the point where sometimes it would induce nausea or vomiting because I felt so terrible. My prayers weren't, God, please love me. It was, I'm so sorry. I'm ruining everything. And that's how I saw myself for a lot of that time. There was those parts of me that were so divided and so broken. And that makes me so sad now. But that story, there's a certain amount of humor in it, taking the picture off the wall and putting it back up.
So, and that was a picture of what?
A Jesus, like huge picture of Jesus.
Oh, you didn't want Jesus seeing you masturbate.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you confessed masturbation, or sorry, you confessed being gay to your bishop at age 15 or so.
Yes.
He gives you miracle forgiveness. How does your adolescence then advance as you're trying to prepare for a mission, etc.? But the bishop knows you've admitted to him that you were gay.
Right. My family was going through some pretty tough stuff during that era. We had moved back to Idaho after my parents' divorce. And my mother married a man who was extremely verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive. And so at the time, it was mostly just my little sister and I in the house. Subsequently, a few years later, my little sister also came out of the closet before I did. And her name is Sherry. I'll talk about her. But we were going through a tremendous amount of emotional struggles in the household. And they didn't divorce until I was 17. So a lot of my adolescence was just dominated by his presence. I didn't have time to focus on being gay. So I kind of had this idea that if I'm really good and try really hard, then I can maybe fix my family, was a lot of it. One particular story, there was a night he was just screaming and berating my mother. And I was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and he just was calling her names and being horrible. And I remembered thinking, I have the priesthood, and I'm an honorable priesthood holder. And I stood up in the house and I put my arm to the square and said, by the name of Jesus Christ, I command this evil to leave our home. And nothing happened. And I remember rushing back to my room in tears, thinking, here I am, I'm broken, I'm not good enough. Other priesthood holders would be worthy, but because I'm gay, I was not worthy enough to stop this abuse. So my later adolescence was less dominated about homosexuality and more dominated by family trauma and the deep internal shame that I had over being gay. And then I graduated and went on my mission and thought, this will be the thing that fixes everything. And obviously that didn't work.
So did you have any experiences with, sexual experiences with men?
Nothing.
During high school, pre-mission?
I didn't hold hands or kiss anyone until I was 27 years old. And that was the woman who became my wife. And I'll tell that story in a minute.
Okay.
Never a man, never a boy, never a girl. I was so focused on being the good priesthood holder.
So on your mission, were you ever attracted to companions?
Constantly.
And what was that like?
It was horrible. My mission started off really roughly. I went to the MTC on December 31st, 1997, New Year's Eve. And a week into my mission, Stephen R. Covey came and gave a devotional address to the missionaries, in which he talked about if we have enough faith, we can be healed of anything. And I had the most profoundly spiritual experience of my life up to that time. His words just lit me up from inside out. And I just knew that it was direct answer to prayer. Like this, I can be cured. I can be cured. If my faith is great enough and if my desires are in the right place, I can be cured. And I prayed all day and I fasted all day. And I went to bed that night thinking, I am going to see an angel. Like I remember feeling like that. Like this is a first vision level experience. And in the morning when I woke up, nothing was different. The MTC, they have those giant group showers. And it was immediately apparent upon waking up and showering with a bunch of other 19-year-olds that I was still gay. And that's cruel, by the way, to say you have to have pure thoughts and you need to keep your thoughts clear. By the way, we're going to make you shower with 20 other guys. That was rough. That was a rough thing. So later that day, I went to the branch president of my little missionary district. I was only in the MTC 2.5 weeks. And I told him I'd been fasting for a day and a half. And I told him I had this answer to prayer. I can be cured. And he just very sadly put his hand on my shoulder. He'd never met me before and said, this isn't something you can be cured of. Maybe you can be cured, but it's not the right time for you. God has inspired me to tell you this is a burden that you're meant to carry with you. So I went again into my missionary experience feeling like just broken. There's nothing that can be done, no matter how great my faith is. I've been meant to carry this burden. So my mission was really largely dominated by depression, honestly. So I had a lot of sexual attractions. My first baptism in my mission was a gay man who admitted he was gay after his baptism. And during his baptismal interview, they said, have you ever been on parole? Have you ever murdered someone? Have you ever been involved in a homosexual relationship? And he refused to move forward after that, saying, how dare you equate being gay with murder? I won't step forward after that. And he was the first outwardly gay person I had ever met. So my mission was pretty tough. I had a lot of tough experiences, and it was really dominated by depression, although I was a very faithful, consistent missionary.
Okay, so and I imagine that you spent a lot of time on your knees and a lot of time working, trying to have God take away your sexuality. And you said it's cruel, but what I've noticed, one of my master's thesis was on scrupulosity, which is religious OCD. What I've noticed is that many gay Mormons who are still trying to make it all work exhibit almost extreme forms of religiosity, hyper-religiosity, with this sort of bargain that if I'm extra righteous, if I'm extra faithful, God will take this away from me.
Yes.
Is that kind of how you might have been?
Yeah, although I think it probably went half and half. And this describes my entire 20s as well, by the way. I'd spent about 50% of my time hyper-religious. I'm going to do everything to the 100th degree. And then the other half of the time, I just went through the motions. I was just too shut off to do anything more than just go through. I mean, I was faithful consistently, temple attendance and sacrament meeting and callings and missionary work. But about half of the time, I just felt shut off, like it was never going to be good enough. But so I think, yes, to both of those. And speaking psychologically, I think a lot of times people who are in traumatic situations think if I can just be the woman who's being consistently beat by her husband thinks if I can just keep the house clean and make sure the kids are taken care of, then he'll love me. I think that when you're being abused spiritually, physically, emotionally, that hyper religiosity, or if I can be better, is an attempt to reconcile the reality of your life with and a way to escape it. I think that's a pretty common thing with anyone who goes through trauma.
Patricia writes, were you pressured by others to serve a mission, or was it more an internal drive or push to serve?
There were 7 kids in my family. I was the only one who served a mission. I always felt like I was the one who was gonna do the whole Mormon thing and be really good at it. So there wasn't you must serve a mission from anyone, but it just was the expectation from my family and for myself.
Okay, so it was all you. So anything else about your mission related to your journey as a gay Mormon man?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so many stories. I had a couple of companions that I just fell head over heels in love with, and others that I felt completely bullied by. I mean, there's a lot of individual stories. Another really significant story, there was a period of time when I was in that hyper-religious phase and working really hard and again, kind of subconsciously thinking if I can work hard enough, then I'll be cured, I'll be fixed, I'll be amended. And my companion and I were assaulted. I was in Philadelphia by a group of men in the street. And my companion didn't get touched, but I got punched multiple times and knocked unconscious during a mugging. And that experience altered the remaining parts of my mission. I no longer trusted. I kind of stopped praying, or when I would pray, it would be just by rote. There was no feeling or emotion in it. I kind of stopped trusting God at that point. I couldn't do enough. And here now these men I'm supposed to be protected, and now these men are hurting me. And it became a very significant turning point for me, as far as I went through violence at home, and now I'm out here and being subjected to violence again. That was a rough patch too.
So what did you do after your mission?
I went immediately to college and did 6 straight years of college.
Where'd you
go? Rick's College at first, before it was BYU Idaho. It turned into BYU Idaho while I was there. And then Boise State University, and eventually Eastern Washington University for my graduate degree. And my second semester of college is when I met Maggie, who's the woman who would become my wife much later. So I was just off a mission. She was just out of high school.
Do you use real names in the book, or do you use
I use
pseudonyms?
some real names and some pseudonyms. Maggie is a pseudonym.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go back to Rick's, and there are all these sort of people super excited, all these students super excited to date, and you're still gay.
Yep.
What's that like, trying to date at Rick's at a BYU school when you're gay?
I didn't date. I avoided dating a lot. I worked full time. I would take 18 or 21 credits. And then I was often like starring in a school play. I joined the choir. I started an a cappella group and a comedy troupe. I kept myself so busy, plus church callings, that I wouldn't have time to focus. But I did date, and there were so many awkward encounters. There'd be the third date, and I like to think I was somewhat handsome, and I was the good Mormon boy, so there were girls interested. And you'd get to the third date, and there'd be that moment at the end of the date where the girl would expect you to lean in and kiss her, and I would find a reason not to. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. And so there were lots of like, what's wrong with me? And did I do something to hurt you? Am I not pretty enough? And I realized I was hurting people. So I just stopped dating. I just shut it off. I kind of had this, I can't get married, but I can't be gay, so I guess I will just live. Hoping eventually I would find somebody that would make that different for me. But I spent several years in my 20s just shut off.
So I have a question that may seem a little bit weird. So you're gay. I'm projecting back to that time. You're gay, but you really want to live the gospel.
Yeah.
And you really want to find someone. And so you go on dates. I could imagine you just saying, well, I'm just going to almost like the principles behind exposure therapy. I'm just going to kiss girls and kiss girls and kiss girls until I like it. Now, I of course have I've never tried really to kiss a man. So I don't know what that would be like, but I would imagine that thought might occur to you, and that
Sure.
you might just try that.
Do you know what I kept hoping at the time? I was doing a lot of theater all through high school and college, and I kept hoping I would get cast in some sort of leading man role that would require me to kiss a girl on stage, because then I'd have to do it, and I could see how it felt. But I never did. And on dates, I just couldn't do it. I'm not wired for women. I just found myself completely incapable. I'd freeze. So yes, the thoughts were there, but I couldn't. And I know other gay men who could and who were able, or who maybe had a little bit more of a bisexual
So on the Kinsey scale,
I have an emotional attraction to women. I have a lot of really close female friends that I'm very attracted to on that level, but there's nothing physical in it for me.
So you're a 6 physically. Probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
But on an emotional level, I mean, and I'll talk about Maggie, but we had a really robust, healthy marriage in every category except sexually.
Okay. So and my daughter Anna has done research on aversion. There's not, it's one thing to track attractions. It's another thing to track aversion. Did you experience sort of sexual aversion to the opposite sex?
Yeah. I think that's fair to say.
Because that's a whole different ball game, right?
Yes. Yeah. When I fantasized, it was about men. When I had sexual dreams of any kind, it was about men. In dating women, again, I didn't even hold hands. I couldn't do the physical thing. It would be a kind of a light hug at the end of a date. It wasn't there for me ever.
Okay. So you just throw yourself into theater and schoolwork and jobs and stay really busy.
3.9 GPA and 21 credits and 18 credits. And yeah, I kept every moment really, really busy all through my early 20s.
I should note, we have a comment here from Scotty Clausen. He writes, "Thanks for sharing your story, Chad. One of your mission companions here. We knocked on the door of the gay man that was baptized."
Hey, Scott.
I remember him talking about how much he liked Donny Osmond. I had no idea you were gay, and I really enjoyed serving together. Thanks for sharing. Nothing but respect for you, my man. Now, have you been in touch with...
No.
Oh, so this is like a first...
Scott was my mission trainer. I haven't seen Scott since March of 1998. Hey, it's great to hear from you, Matt. I'll totally reach out after this. I hope you're well.
Isn't that great?
That's fantastic.
Isn't Facebook amazing?
What a small world.
Also, Michael writes, just hearing him talk, I bet he's a tremendous social worker, a big help to those who go to see him. So Michael's liking what you're putting down.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Yeah, we want to thank anyone who's tuned in live for your questions and comments. Please post more. It makes the interview really fun and interesting. So how did you go to finding someone to marry when you were doing everything to avoid
it? I'll fast forward through a little bit of the story here, but pushed myself into graduate school. I'm still feeling very...
Okay, so you did the full undergrad.
Yeah, 6 years straight of school. I didn't take any breaks.
No, but your undergrad, then no significant dating?
No relationships, no girlfriends, no engagements.
And were people like saying, what's the deal? Why aren't you married yet?
Sure. And I used I'm in school, I'm being a good Mormon boy, the right person hasn't come along yet. So lots of excuses.
And this may be offensive to say, and it may be stereotypical, but this is a part of growing people's awareness. You don't present necessarily as a stereotypically gay man.
Right.
And I don't know if that's something that you worked on or if that's just not
this is
who
just
you
me.
are.
No,
okay.
This is just me.
So when you talk about trying to manage, letting on as a child, there was never any speech patterns or behaviors that you tried to manage?
Again, I was not sports oriented. I've always been more creative, show choir and drama. So, I mean, there's some elements of that. But as far as presentation, I don't often get that I'm a very feminine in presentation. I have a lot of friends are, and I feel like I just have to toss out the caveat. I feel like there's a bias toward masculine gays. The feminine gays, guys who present more effeminate, are often shamed for that, as if they are less than masculine gays, and they're treated that way in the gay community and in the straight community. So I don't want to. I'm not superior in any way, but on a fact level, no, I did not present as very feminine in my mannerisms.
So that would have just made it so people are like, come on, dude, get married. You know what's going on.
Right. That said, I know a lot of Mormon straight guys who are really feminine, who have a lot of effeminate presentation.
Yeah. Of course.
So had I been feminine, I don't know that it would have made any difference.
Yeah. So you did 6 years of school, never really dating.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that getting your social worker degree? Or?
Yeah. I got my master's in social work. About my fourth year in school, Maggie and I had dated off and on, just kind of randomly. And she frequently got very frustrated because I wouldn't advance the relationship. She went on a mission, and I was in Boise, and my little sister, who's 3 years younger than me, came out of the closet at that time while living with me. She came to live with me. So my little sister, Sherry, is very, very special to me, but I felt very responsible for her. I was the man of the house. I was the priesthood holder. And when she came out of the closet, I took it as a personal failure, and I was horrible to her. My entire family was.
Were you out to your family by this point?
No.
Okay, so you had come out to that bishop.
Just that bishop, that's it.
What about your mission president?
Nope.
Okay, so you had... Wow.
One therapist and that one bishop, and then the branch president guy in the MTC. Those are the only people I had ever told.
So you stayed in the closet for a super long time.
I was locked up, man.
Yeah.
So my little sister came out, and my whole family were horrible. I would yell at her as if I was her authoritarian priesthood holder. What's wrong with you?
So you're gay. You know you're gay.
Yeah.
And yet your sister comes out as lesbian, and you're like worse to her than
anyone had been to me about the gay thing.
Explain how that happens.
I think psychologically, I was so wrapped up in being the good Mormon boy and curing myself. And her coming out at that time then represented to me another personal failure. Not only that, but if she's going to come out and she's broken, then what hope is there for me? And so you're going to start drinking and smoking, and you're never going to make it into heaven. You're severing your family bonds. What's wrong with you? And Sherry, my entire family, and I won't rat anyone else out, but my entire family, my sisters, my brother, my parents, were all really awful to her. She's very happy now. She's married and living on the East Coast, and we're very close. We speak multiple times per week. I'm close with she and her wife, Heather. But she had a few pretty rough years there. She moved to the East Coast and said, I am going to live life on my terms. And we were pretty broken there for a while.
I think, and I'm not trying to tell you about your experience, but I think feeling like a failure might explain part of it. But there's also this internalized homophobia.
Absolutely.
That's got to also explain why some of the most ardent opponents of same-sex sexuality, same-sex love, same-sex marriage turn out to be gay. What is that?
If you're gay, then you're broken. You're not trying hard enough. That's how I viewed it at the time. I knew other gay people that were not Mormon, and I was very kind and loving toward them. But to be Mormon and gay was unacceptable.
And did you self-identify as gay, or did you self-identify as straight?
Around that time, this is 24, I started using the same-sex attracted term.
Tell us why that term is used and what's problematic about it.
Well, I didn't have the words for this until later, but you start reading the texts, or I would look up things privately, and there'd be paragraphs about don't use the word gay. Gay represents a dangerous identity. It associates you with a community of people who are evil, who are sexually active, who are part of everything that we do not stand for as a religion. But if you say you're same-sex attracted, or same-gender wired is another term I heard, or even homo-emotionally damaged was a term I heard. If you use these terms, you can accept that there's something wrong that you're trying to make right. But the word gay was dangerous. There was a fear associated with that.
Okay, and no one would have asked you, "Are you gay?" at that time when you were a college student. But internally, you would not have identified. You would have identified as same-sex attracted.
Correct. Yeah, I went to a therapist,
and you would have told your sister this, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You would or would not?
I would have. Well, after she came out.
Okay.
You're not gay. You're same-sex attracted, or you're being selfish, which is the phrase the Miracle of Forgiveness uses. Someone who says they're gay, it's just a particular form of selfishness.
So hard. But would you have said, "Hey, I'm same-sex attracted"?
No, I didn't tell her.
Okay, so isn't that interesting? She's coming out to you. She's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And even if you disapprove, you could still say, "You know what? I get what you're going through because I experienced this too, but here's how I'm dealing with it." What kept you from going there?
Yeah, I was incapable of responding with compassion, which is bizarre because in every other area of our lives at the time, I was compassionate and kind and understanding. I gave her a place to live. And I tell her story pretty openly in my book. And that's not a pseudonym. Her name is Sherry. She's very open with her story also. After she came out, I went to a therapist, a non-Mormon therapist for the first time ever. And I started talking about my problems. And he, in session, said, "Chad, I think you're gay." And I was like, "How dare you?" I was furious, and I left and never came back. I was so mad that he put that term on me. So that's just where I was at the time emotionally.
So powerful.
Yeah, it was awful at the time.
Yeah.
And Sherry and I laugh now. I mean, growing up, I was the kid who hosted the dinner parties and was in the high school show choir. She was the one bedroom over, never wore makeup, wore boy clothes to school. The fact that we were so emotionally close but didn't know each other were gay is almost hilarious. But we're very close now. So if we fast forward to the age of 26. I'm finishing graduate school, more years of depression. Maggie came home off of her mission and moved to be near me, and we started spending a lot of time together. And at this point, it had been 6 years, which is a pretty long Mormon courtship. Although we'd never been a serious item.
That's forever.
It was a long time. So she sat me down one day and was very emotional and very angry and said, we clearly like each other. If we're moving toward a future, then what is wrong? Like, you've never held my hand. You've never kissed me. I said, I've never held anyone's hand. I've never kissed anyone. And I told her that I was gay.
How do you do a 6-year courtship and never like have any intimacy, physical intimacy?
I don't know how to answer that.
And what would keep her hanging on?
I don't know how to answer that except that we were really fond of each other and everything else in our relationship was really good. But so that night when she confronted me, why haven't you ever kissed me? I told her I was gay. And I immediately corrected myself. That was the first time I'd ever used the word gay out loud. Same-sex attracted, not gay. She said, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'm attracted to men. I've never kissed anyone. And she said, well, do you like me? And I said, I do. And that was our first kiss. Immediately after telling her I was gay was our first kiss.
Instigated by you or her?
I think
Both?
I think instigated by her and me realizing if I don't kiss her right now, then I'm never going to. So I think there was a lot of pressure I was putting on myself. Like, this is my moment. And I was 26 turning 27. I mean, that's a long time.
So you weren't attracted to women. So what was that like to kiss Maggie?
It wasn't, and I want to be very gentle because she's still a big part of my life. It's nothing about her. On a spiritual level, she is the most wonderful person. And physically, she's a beautiful person. That's just not what I'm wired for. So I didn't feel anything, but I recognized that it made her happy. And if I could make her happy, then maybe I was okay. And that became the basis for our entire marriage. We married 3 months later in the temple.
3 months?
Yeah, really quickly after that. In the temple, and got a home and started our life. And as long as I could make sure she was happy, I didn't have to feel anything. So all the obsession I put into taking care of my family as a teenager, toward being the perfect college student as a 20-something, then my obsession turned into, if I can take care of her and create this perfect Mormon house, then that's all my world needs.
So just checking in with our listeners.
Sure.
Sherry K writes, hey, Chad, Sherry here, love you.
That's my sister.
Is that your sister?
Yeah, I love you too,
So
Sherry.
shout out to Sherry. Megan writes, do you think your reaction to your sister's coming out would have been more supportive if your family hadn't been so upset by it? Was their reaction a deterrent to your eventual coming out?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Seeing the... when I say violence, I don't mean physical, but seeing the violence with they responded to Sherry absolutely knocked me even farther back. I saw Sherry as straying from the fold. And I had other family members who were not active in the church, who had used drugs, who had been in jail, who had been drinking. My family is not without problems by any means, but her coming out was worse than all of those things. So the way that my family reacted absolutely knocked me farther back.
Thanks for that question, Megan. Eric writes, actually, Whitney writes, Chad, you are a beacon and a light. So much love for you.
Thanks, Whitney.
Eric writes, your story is like mine, and I appreciate you telling it. And your experiences with your family is exactly like mine. My sister said that there was no such thing as gay. My therapist said I wasn't gay and that I needed conversion therapy if I wanted it. I've been sent to therapists since I was 18. You are lucky to be young now and figure things out sooner. Not like me when I was in my 20s and in the 80s and 90s and had to live through decades of abuse from the church and society. The church acknowledges SSA now. Back when I was a kid, I was evil. I will never get over what was pounded into my psyche.
Eric, I'm sorry, man. My heart goes out to you. And yeah, I speak that same language. I understand.
Yeah. Love to you, Eric, and so sorry. So you get married.
We got married. And I think in the back of my brain, I thought, well, now I'm straight because I'm married. But the same-sex attraction feelings didn't go away. That divided part of me, that part that I just kept shoving away, got violent with me. It started screaming out to be noticed, and I would just shove it down and push it down and throw myself into church service. And again, Maggie and I outwardly had a very happy marriage. We hosted parties during which we had lots of Mormon couples that would come over, and they would say things like, "Chad's not like my husband." Like we'd get a lot of that stuff. But we lived around some of my sisters. We had a very vibrant family life. Elders Quorum president, gospel doctrine teacher. Yeah. I mean, I was all in. And plus I was working 40, 50, 60 hours a week in my job.
Doing what?
Therapy and child protection work, drug and addiction work. So working as a social worker.
Let me just ask you really quick. So going back to when you told her you were gay, and then you kiss her, and then you're married 3 months later. There are a lot of women who enter into these mixed orientation marriages. They're faithful. They hear about Ty Mansfield, or they hear about Josh and Lolly Weed,
Sure.
and they say, "Oh," or they go to these North Star conferences, or back then maybe it was Evergreen, and they hear these people testify. We did it, we do it, we make it work. You can do it too, sort of thing. What do you think? And I know you can't speak for your ex-wife, but what is the process for a believing female to get to the point where she's willing to marry a gay male with full awareness? How does that happen? Why wouldn't they just run away?
She's been asked this question. We've done presentations together before, and we've had lots of conversations over the years. In her mind, gay wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. She heard me tell her that I was gay, and it just didn't resonate. It was, here's this man that I love, and he's a good priesthood holder, and we take care of each other, and he wants to make me happy. And that was enough.
And what would keep her from saying something like, "I want to be cherished physically and loved romantically, and by the way, it's dangerous to marry a gay person because they might be unfulfilled and may not love you and may not make you feel good, and you may lose self-esteem, and they may seek out physical intimacy elsewhere because they're not getting it in the marriage." And I mean, they're all, and the divorce rates, by the way, according to our research, are upwards of 70%.
Sure.
So what keeps sort of all those things that should be this sort of Danger Will Robinson red warning labels? What keeps a Mormon woman from sort of knowing all that and processing all that to impact their decisions?
It wasn't talked about. It wasn't a language that she spoke at the time. Now she could easily stand up and tell the story of what it's like for a straight woman marrying a gay man in a Mormon marriage. But she saw a righteous, worthy priesthood holder. And again, we really clicked on every other level. And so for her, it was okay. It was okay. I think that we have to have a wider discussion about misogyny in the church and the patriarchy of the Mormon culture, not only the Mormon culture, but the American culture of women who think they can fix men, or women who are willing to overlook certain things because they just want to be happy. We teach girls from very young that your value is related to your virtue, and you need to find a good priesthood holder. There's all of these mixed messages that go along with that. And that's a whole separate conversation that could go on for hours. But I think that there's certainly some elements to that. The same of, unless you're married in the temple, you have very little value in Mormon society. So find a good priesthood holder. And historically, people who grow up gay and Mormon are really good priesthood holders. Not all of them by any means, but they're the really true blue active people. And so there's a level of attraction for women. And that's the part that's kind of heartbreaking here, is because Maggie was fully invested into me.
She was attracted to you.
Right. But I was a broken person. She fell in love with someone who was broken.
Yeah. So I think part of the point I'm trying to make is there's just this basic lack of information available in Mormon culture. I did all this research for my dissertation that's been published now. What I wanted is just sort of it to be widely known within Mormonism that yes, it is within your right as a human being to marry who you want to marry, and yes, yes, there probably is such a thing as a mixed orientation marriage that does okay. My goal has never been to sort of make it so that's illegal or shamed or, to even ever make the claim that no one should do it. But my view is no Mormon woman should ever marry a gay man or any other combination of a mixed orientation marriage that might occur without knowing that the divorce rates are triple what other divorce rates might be.
Right.
That quality of life is lower than people who report lupus, which is a debilitating disease. That's usually because the female in these relationships does not feel wanted or desired. That's because there are all sorts of problems with sexual intimacy, self-esteem. There are problems with depression. There are problems with sexual identity distress, and just kind of more often than not, really unhealthy, unfulfilling lives that end in divorce with children impacted.
Right.
And so I guess, it's odd in the 2000s or even 2000 teens that this isn't just sort of widely understood, such that a woman like Maggie wouldn't just sort of have all that at her disposal when she's considering that marriage.
Right.
So that then she could make a really informed decision. And I'm just curious, what was it about? Because it wasn't like it wasn't known back then that this happened, right?
Yeah, but she and I both had pretty sheltered upbringings. I mean, I came from a pretty tragic family background. She came from a very happy Mormon nuclear family. Mom, dad, daughter, son. Active in church, loving, consistent family. And she just didn't know. The word gay didn't send off any alarm bells for her. And again, that's how she, I think, would answer that question. And there's also, in a recent conversation with my mother, my mom and I are very close. She's still very active. She has 2 gay kids, and she very carefully skirts the line of loving her gay children and being active in her church. But she asked me in a recent conversation, she says, are people who are gay really happy? Because I see so much evidence of depression and anxiety and suicidality in gay people. Like, what is that? And we talked about, I compared it to young girls who are raised and are told you should try for a particular field. Maybe you should just be a wife, but if you have to work, be a nurse or a teacher. If we had someone then saying, why aren't there more girl scientists? Or why aren't there more girl mathematicians? There's a direct correlation between that, between the value that we're raised with. When you have an entire group of people who are represented in every area of society, every religion, every skin color, every country, who are being told you're wrong, you're broken, of course gay people are raised with depression and confusion and anxiety. It's going to be higher represented based on childhood experiences of feeling different. So we have a lot of work to do. That said, on the flip side of all that, gay people, and particularly transgender people who go through the work of coming to terms with their childhood and owning who they are the happiest, the most vibrant, incredible people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing in my entire life. And that's directly opposed to this idea that if you just work harder in the church, then you'll be happy. Utah has, I'm tangentially going off here, but Utah has the highest rates of suicide among teens, depression among women and men, gender discrimination in the workplace. There's all of these things that do not correlate with the message that Mormonism delivers as far as just follow the rules and everyone will be happy. It's opposite of that. There's higher rates of depression and shaming. That was not the answer to your question, but I think there's a correlation there.
I'm just saying there's something about fundamentalist religions where people are sheltered when there's so much information and reason for them to sort of know that there's concern or data or danger. Somehow fundamentalist Orthodox religions can raise a kid to be 21, 25, 27 and not just know some of the basic facts of life.
Not even just 21, 25, 27, but 60, 62, 75. Yeah. I have clients who are elderly who are just coming out of the closet.
Yeah. And so it's just something to be thoughtful about is how do we get the word out? How do we get the word out in a culture that sometimes warns and scares people away from learning very basic things?
Right.
Because do you think that today there are young couples at BYU, Idaho, where the boy comes out to the girl as gay and then the girl is like, I can do this, we can do this. I mean, do you think this is still happening?
Do I think it still happens? Yes. And I think it happens frequently.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not an
in
uncommon
2018.
Yes,
right?
it's not an uncommon isolated encounter.
Yeah.